Hey guys and gals. So on my social media a few weeks ago, I asked for questions because I wanted to do direct questions that come from you so that I can find ways to give value to help you figure out which guitars are best for you. And a lot of the questions came down to my preferences, my opinions on certain pieces of gear. So let's dig in. First, Aaliyah Franson. If you guys don't follow her, she's awesome. She's this great singer-songwriter. She's in college. I think she lives in like the Midwest somewhere, Wisconsin, Minnesota. What do you think about gear shaming, especially playing Squiers as seen as inferior or whatever? This is a serious thing. My favorite guitar that I own, or one of my favorite guitars that I own, is my Tom DeLonge Squier. But here's the thing, I refinished the neck and I put a Fender decal on it, and I'm pretty sure I did it because of the insecurity that she's talking about, which is the fact that for some reason you believe that you're inferior because you have a Squier instead of a Fender. Especially on my Squier, before I refinished the neck, I'd already changed the pickup, I'd refretted the guitar, I'd put a new bridge on it. Every part that I could change on it other than the wood of the body and the wood of the neck and the pick guard are changed. Everything. Nut, tuners, strings, bridge, saddles. I even changed the ferrules. I don't know why, just thought it seemed important. But it's a real thing and it is a problem. Right now, some of the Squiers are better than most Fenders were until the mid-1990s. But the bigger thing is, and this exposes a larger truth about guitar culture and just our culture in general, there are brands that give us identity and we believe new things about ourselves because of those brands. Sometimes that's really good. Like having a Martin guitar, there is something really cool and there's a shift in what you believe about yourself that comes from that guitar. But then there's also the flip side of that that's pretty dark and pretty unfortunate, which is I play a Squier, therefore I'm not as good of a guitar player, therefore I'm not professional, I'm not going to make it. Or I'm not going to discover myself. So that's a part of, you got to figure out how to discover your identity and then just be proud of whatever guitar you have. In photography, there's this phrase, I talked about this last week in a video, which is best camera is the one that you have with you. And so the same thing is true in guitars. The best guitar for you is the one you already have. So if you have a Squier, learn to play that thing really well. If you have an Ibanez, learn to play that really well. There are tips and tricks. So on Squiers, if people complain about your tone or if you don't like your tone, there are tons of things you can do to a Squier Telly or a Strat or whatever. You can change pickups, you can change the electronics, you can change the hardware. There are lots of things you can do that will make it sound and play better. But don't feel bad for having the guitar that you have, because in the end, the measure of your creativity as a musician is not bound up in the quality of gear that you have. So, Andrew McGee says, what are your thoughts on modeling amps? I haven't played a ton of modeling amps because it's usually pretty far outside of my lane for a couple reasons. I pretty much only buy used gear. I've only bought a couple pieces of gear new ever. And so modeling amps haven't quite entered into the used space yet. I am really, really curious and excited to try the Deluxe Reverb Tone Master. Of all those amps that have come out, Kemper, some of the Line 6 stuff, or the new Fender stuff, I think Fender got the idea right, which is let's use this technology to just do one amplifier really, really, really well. I'm really curious to try that. I'm going to talk to this shop here in town. They're a Fender dealer, and see if I can borrow one when they get one in and shoot a video on it and just kind of give my thoughts on it. Yeah, I think modeling amps have really blown people's minds, especially all those Andertons videos of those guys, like where it's if the amp is in the other room and you're just in the room with the speaker, you can't tell. And that's, you know, I think that's the way it's going, but it doesn't mean that tube amps are dead. I think that there's a place to have a really good modeling amp. Like if you're playing in a different tone every day and you need your tone to be exactly the same, like Rhett has done a great video with his Kemper where he doesn't usually take that out as much, but then where he'll take out his HX Stomp or his Helix now. There's a place for modeling amps, especially when you get to where you need to have the same tone in a different tone every night. Because if a tube amp breaks, there are fewer and fewer people around that are able to fix it, especially quickly. I think that modeling amps are awesome. So David asked, what is my favorite acoustic guitar and what's my favorite body size? My favorite acoustic guitars tend to follow a couple patterns. I really like mahogany back and sides. I really don't feel the pressure anymore to like rosewood. There are guitars that are rosewood back and sides that I enjoy, but overall to me, they're too bassy. They're not quite what I want in just a really broad sounding acoustic guitar. So I like mahogany guitars. I love 12 fret guitars. 12 fret dreadnoughts, 12 fret double O's, triple O's. I just think that it's really a cool aesthetic, and it also does sound different. It'll give you a little more low end while still maintaining that really cool mahogany kind of clear projection. I had a 2001 or 2002 Martin 0016 slot head gloss top. So this was really kind of a peanut shaped cool slot head. So I like mahogany guitars, I like 12 fret guitars, and I really like slot head guitars. My dream guitar, if I was able to continue the dream guitar challenge, my dream custom guitar that I would have built, and maybe it can still happen, I'd love to work it out with Huss and Dalton to figure out how to make this guitar. It is a 12 fret dreadnought, round shouldered, mahogany back and side, torrefied top, slot headstock dreadnought. So Billy says, old Ticos really went up. They used to be $75, now they're $250. Weird change, thoughts? I don't get it. I don't. I have bought and sold. I know in the shop I used to work in, we easily had 75 or 100 of these. They'd be these, gold foil pickups, the string tree that, comes through the guitar. It's kind of a U-bolt. To me, they've always been cool, but they feel very student level. They feel very cheap in how they're made. They don't play that well. The necks are really narrow, but at the same time, there are certain bands that are making these really cool now. So I get it. They are really cool. I think $250 could be about right if they've been taken care of, if they've had a setup, if the wiring still works really well. Usually where those are the cheapest, they're cheap. Everything about them was really cheap manufacturing coming from Japan in the late 60s, early 70s. But overall, the cheapest places are the pots and switches. So if you can change those out to good and robust switches and pots, they could be definitely worth, $200, $250. So Dan asked if I could buy any guitar from the Vintera line, what would I choose and why? I haven't looked at the Vintera line. A lot of the new kind of reimagined Fender-y stuff just is not my deal at all. Novo, I think they do awesome as far as rethinking what could have been. My friend Evan with Rude Guitars does that really well. It seems a little too on the nose for Fender themselves to be like, well, if we would have done our own things different. Just philosophically, that vibe is weird to me. So Jay says, what about Epiphone? Epis before 1970 and Epis after 1970 made in Japan. There's a huge difference. A friend of mine just emailed me a picture that he found. He got a 69 or a 70 Texan. And so his looks like it was one of the very last ones made in the US, made in Kalamazoo. So Epiphone in Kalamazoo is a wonderful, they're great guitars. They are the same as Gibsons, and they are so much more affordable than Gibsons from that same time, which is really interesting. I think Texans obviously, anything that the Beatles played has shot up crazy in prices. So Casinos and Texans are going to be crazy money. But you can find others. Oh, what's the FT45? I forget what they call that one. Those are great. Those are great guitars you can find for $2,000, $2,500. Epiphones made in the US before 1970 are great. Epiphones after that, the ones made in Japan, they typically look really cool and they look the part, but they just don't sound that great and they don't play that well. So I think they are appropriately priced. When you can find 70s Epiphones and Gibsons for $400 or $500, I think that's about right. What is my favorite guitar company for pickups? Okay, let's answer this in two ways. For acoustic guitar pickups, there is no doubt in my mind it is LR Baggs. I think that LR Baggs are the best guitar pickups you can get because it's really hard to amplify an acoustic guitar to where it sounds, not only does it sound like an acoustic guitar, but will it sound like your acoustic guitar? So transducers that go under the saddle, they really don't sound like your guitar. They just convert the vibration of your guitar coming through the saddle into an electrical signal. So it really doesn't matter. That's why those Chet Atkins guitars, like Dave Matthews used to play at Chet Atkins. So it's a solid body with an acoustic style bridge and that acoustic pickup, and it sounds like an acoustic guitar from the 80s and 90s. And that's because it's just using a pickup that does not matter what the guitar is. So LR Baggs was maybe not the first, but they've done it the best to put condenser mics inside guitars to figure out ways, like the I-beam system, even though it wasn't great, it was a big shift into getting a guitar pickup that sounds like the actual guitar. I have a whole video about pickups when I put a pickup. I put an LR Baggs Anthem SL in my Martin last year, so I'll put a card for that up here. Other really good guitar pickups that you should know about are K&K. Their Pure Mini and their Pure Western are great pickups. If you want low maintenance, sounds good, I would put a Pure Mini or a Pure Western in your guitar. They don't take batteries, they just sound really good, but the money you save on the pickup price, you probably should spend on a good preamp. The LR Baggs Venue is great, the Session is really good. I am not a fan of Fishman, and it bums me out because probably my favorite guitar player, singer-songwriter, Jason Isbell, loves Fishman, and he gets really good tones out of it, but for me, I just don't like how they sound, and I don't like the idea that they are just running their tuned pickup through digital mic profiles. There's too much like digital voodoo happening with the Fishman system that I'm just not a fan of. Electric guitar pickups, what are my favorites? I love Seymour Duncan. To me, Seymour Duncan makes the best pickups, and you can find them so readily used. They are such a low cost way to totally change the way your guitar sounds. To me, I think that a Seymour Duncan especially, I forgot. So the Seymour Duncan, all of the standard Seymour Duncans are awesome. I really, really like the Seymour Duncan Antiquities. They are my favorite pickups I've ever put in my Telecaster. They look the part, they feel the part, they sound like old pickups, they're super reliable. I've had 4 sets of them. I put them in different Telecasters as I was building a bunch of guitars a couple of years ago before I was doing YouTube. I think Seymour Duncan Antiquities are awesome. They're pretty pricey. Thankfully, I think I've only bought 1 set new. All the others I found used here and there. Other ones that are really notable, Lindy Fralin makes amazing pickups. I just played the Husson Dalton Statesboro last week, and I was really impressed with those. My friend Evan makes really great pickups for Rude guitars. Scatterwound small batch build pickups work really well for me, and they're pretty affordable. So Mitch asks, do you think the vintage guitar trend will continue? Seems like in recent years it's become big. It certainly has gotten really big. For anyone that was in the guitar world before 2007, you know that it was way bigger as far as prices. Like, numbers were insane. The Guitar and Amp Center that I worked for in Harrisonburg, we sold any Strat we could find from the 50s and 60s in 2005, 2006, and the beginning of 2007. We were selling, if they were sunburst or kind of the normal colors, we'd sell them for $35,000, $40,000. If they were the funky, cool colors, Dakota Red, Daphne Blue, Sonic Blue, Shell Pink, we had a Shell Pink, I forget what year it was, but it was an amazing Shell Pink Strat. We were selling those for 45, 50 grand. We sold a Les Paul, we had a 60 Les Paul Burst that we sold for $465,000 in 2006. And then the crash happened, and all of a sudden now great Strats, funky color Strats, they're 15, 20 grand, but they're half or a third of what they were. I think that the vintage guitar culture is going to continue to grow, but I think that we have a really big problem on our hands. The biggest problem that I see in this space is that so many dealers, so like Norm and George and all of these high-end guitar dealers, they would sell those guitars. You know, they were the ones that owned those guitars in the 90s, you know, like, and they got them for a couple $100. The guy that I used to work for, he bought a bunch of old Strats for $500 to $700 from the 50s and 60s. And then they sold them to somebody, and then a couple years later they bought them back. You know, so they sold them for $8,000, and then they bought them back for 10. They sold them for 12, and then they bought them back, and then they sold them for 15. I think that a lot of those guys just got high on their own supply, and they ended up just believing their own hype. And so in the end, they got caught holding the bag. So I think that most of the true vintage guitars are now in the hands of dealers, not in the hands of players. I think that's a shift that's going to need to happen. I think that because that has happened, now more guitar companies, you know, Fender started relicking more guitars, Gibson started relicking more guitars, but then you also have great guitar companies like Novo and Fano and these other smaller builders coming out with new guitars. Collings is in this space too. New guitars that did not exist a while ago, but they are aged and relict and they look like they're old guitars. So I think because all of the vintage guitars are mostly in the hands of dealers and they are really expensive, they're losing a ton of money on them, but they're still selling them for more than most guitar players can actually pay. And then so now you have these other companies coming in that are making really great guitars that give you the option to own a guitar that has tons of mojo, that looks like it's really old, but you know, it's $2,000 or $3,000 for the great ones there, compared to 8 or 10 for the middle of the road ones, 15 or 20 for the really good ones. Thanks for all these questions. I love hearing from you guys. If you have questions, comments, slanderous remarks, please leave them below. I'm Jeremy. I'm the Guitar Hunter. Guitar Hunters fill the world with music and friendship. So if you want to be a guitar hunter, subscribe to this channel. Follow me on Instagram. You can go to jeremytheguitarhunter.com. You can buy a t-shirt. That is a great way to support me and help me keep making these videos. Thanks for watching. See you later.